This is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Four minutes before 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. One of the contentious subjects that we can bring up on radio, talk radio, in order to get the phones ringing is unions. I've been doing this long enough to know that if we start to talk about unions, you will get a very, very passionate phone calls from people who think that this country wouldn't be as strong as it is if it weren't for unions. I'm on that side, actually. I agree with that. But others don't agree with that, and they're just as passionate. And I always know it's a button-pushing subject. So, with that said, I expect the phones to ring. However, I want to make sure that our guest has enough time to talk to us about his book. This is a fascinating look and research into perhaps a way to maybe support the thing I think is true, which is that this country wouldn't be as great if it weren't for unions. Erik Loomis is an historian. He's an associate professor of history at the University of Rhode Island. He's a blogger at Lawyers, Guns, and Money on labor and environmental issues past and present. He's a contributor to the New York Times, Dissent, the Washington Post, and the New Republic. His book is called A History of America in 10 Strikes, 10 Moments in History When Labor Challenged the Very Nature of Power in America. All right, Erik Loomis, good morning, sir. It's an honor to have you on our show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so did the research confirm or support your own preconceived beliefs before you did the research?
Yes, I mean, well, I guess I would say that I agree with your intro that unions have made America stronger. Right now we face a world where corporations and the government are combining to undermine workers' rights, and unions are weaker than they have been in many decades. And not surprisingly, income inequality is the highest it's been in a century. Not surprisingly, racial division is once again rising in America. And so, labor unions are critical if we are going to have a future where things like a minimum wage and an 8-hour day and workplace safety are things that matter in America. So, yes, I think that's absolutely critical that we have a strong workers' movement in this country, and it's too bad that not everybody sees it this way.
Is it geographical? We live in Florida, and Florida tends to attract. So we're kind of the melting pot of the melting pot. And it seems to me that the callers who are from the Northeast and the Midwest are usually very pro-union, and many of them from the Southeast are not. I'm not really sure where California and the rest of the West fits into that, but that's kind of the feeling I get. I'm not saying I did a study, but that's just what it seems like.
Yeah, unfortunately, the reality of American history is that white workers in the South, and to some extent in other parts of the country as well, but white workers in the South have simply chosen their identity as whites over their identity as class. That when they have the choice, they will back in the era of Jim Crow, they would vote for Jim Crow politicians who supported white power, even if it meant undermining the ability of these own workers to organize. And that's a very powerful mythology in American history. We saw it again in 2016 with Donald Trump. Unfortunately, that is one of the lessons of the book. If we ask, why are American unions and the American left not as strong in the United States as they are in Europe? A big part of the reason is that white workers will choose racism over class identity over and over and over again, and that is a big challenge that we face going forward.
Explain that a little bit more, because I'm trying to put myself in a position where that would even be an issue. I would always think, and please correct anything I say wrong here, but I would always think that it would be the let's say the man, his family would be more important to him than even race or anything. That he just wants to provide for his family.
Well, you'd like to think that would be the case, but oftentimes, if you look at the history of race in America, very often, white conservative politicians have done very effectively to use this family discussion that you talk about, if you say that black workers are going to take your jobs, or you say immigrant workers are going to take your jobs, that's been a very effective way to use that family ideology against workers, against uniting workers of different races. If you say, as politicians used to say, that, black men are going to threaten your daughters and things like this were used to keep schools segregated, you're going to say it's in my family's interest to keep my schools all white. And so, yes, the idea of a breadwinner is important, but that can be used multiple ways. That is not something that is always going to be used to create unity among the working class. It can also be used to create division. And it's worth noting that the first major law that comes out of the American labor movement that Congress passes is the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 to protect white workers from having to compete with Chinese workers on the West Coast.
Okay, so has that changed? 1882 is quite a while ago. Have things changed?
Well, I think yes and no. I think that the American labor movement, the AFL-CIO, has transformed itself into being a strongly pro-immigrant organization that has done a great deal to build bridges to immigrant organizations and organize immigrant workers. So that has been critical. But we don't have a lot of unions left in the United States. And large swaths of the white working class, of poorer white people in states across the country vote for somebody like Donald Trump, or people in Florida like Ron DeSantis, who are anti-immigrant, who are promoting policies that would divide the working class. And so I think the union movement has changed. I'm not sure that the white working class has changed that much.
Okay, so when you say immigrant, I'm going to disagree somewhat, because I think the voices that I hear from are not anti-immigrant. However, they are conservative. I think they're anti-illegal immigrant, or undocumented citizen, if you want. I think that's the issue, because they feel, and contest this if you will. I suppose you want to, or would be wanting to. They feel it's. I don't think it's a white-black thing, though. I think it's a. The idea that you could be making $15 an hour if that other guy who's an illegal immigrant isn't accepting $7 an hour. That's what I think the issue is.
Well, except it doesn't really work that way. I mean, that first of all, most of the jobs that undocumented immigrants are taking are jobs that other people won't take. So, picking the tomatoes in Florida, for instance, how many white workers are going to go out and do that? We all know that they're not going to go do that. And so you require a workforce who is willing to do that.
Right.
Unfortunately,
unfortunately. Well, then why would they be opposed to them then if they're taking jobs they don't want?
Oh, well, I think again, race and identity matter. I mean, how many people are so angry that people, you hear interviews about these sorts of things all the time, where people who vote for anti-immigrant politicians will talk about their anger about, when they call up and they hear a voice in Spanish saying, dial 7 for Spanish instead of something, and having to hear that other language seems to threaten cultures.
Okay.
I think that some of it's about work, some of it's about economics, but a lot of it is about culture, about what it means to be an American. And if you look at the anti-immigrant rhetoric, it's about assimilation, it's about violence, it's about other sorts of things, which is deeply ironic. Because, the exact same kind of anti-immigrant language and rhetoric were used against Irish immigrants, against Italian immigrants, against Polish immigrants.
I'm
we
familiar.
see this over and over and over again. And all this is today is the same words being used against people from Mexico and Guatemala and Honduras, all of whom are coming to America to make a better life for themselves, just as the ancestors of anti-immigrant people today did 100 years ago or 200 years ago.
My ancestors were immigrants, and they had to come here by way of following, the procedures. There was no way to be an illegal immigrant in my grandfather's day. He had to sign all the papers and had to have a sponsor and all of that. And yes, there was great discrimination against him. He was in the mid-20s. He was from Germany, and all that crap that was going on over there. So because he was German, he had a lot of prejudice against him. But he did it right, and he was able to get a job at a factory in New York, and he was able to get the same wage as any New Yorker, any American would get. I think that the problem or the difference between what you're saying and what our listeners are saying, and the phones are lit up, by the way. I don't want to take away time from you, though. I think what you're going to hear from this listenership is that they're not opposed to immigration. Many of them recognize the fact that that's what makes America great. It's the fact that illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants are able to work and not pay taxes, and everybody, even the Irish immigrants who are here, the children, the progeny of the Irish immigrants, they're saying the same thing. We could all these illegal immigrants could be paying taxes if we would figure out a way to make them legal.
Well, the problem with that is that these immigrants are paying taxes. Right now, if they're working under the table, maybe not, but that's not the reality for the most of these people. They're paying into Social Security. They're paying into Medicare. They're never going to see those benefits. If anything, we owe them money, right? They have contributed a tremendous amount to the American economy. If you have lettuce on your plate in January, if you have tomatoes on your plate in February, that's being picked by immigrants, often who are undocumented. They are making your life better, and we are taking their money by making them pay taxes, Social Security, Medicare. They pay state income taxes. They pay sales tax when they go to the store, and they receive none of the benefits for this. And so if anything, we owe them. They are tremendously adding to our world. They're adding to the quality of life in our nation, and they are coming here out of desperation. You have to understand, and your listeners have to understand, to leave your home is a tragic event. You are leaving your home because you have nothing, because you're in Honduras and Guatemala, and you're scared that a drug gang that is moving drugs north to the United States, that is armed with guns that come from the United States, because we don't have effective gun laws in this country, and they're threatening you and your child, and you want to create a better life. And you realize that if you leave your home in Guatemala and you come here and you're undocumented, you may never see your family ever again.
Erik.
Imagine the level of sacrifice that takes, and yet the lack of empathy among so many Americans is heartbreaking, that we are a nation that considers ourselves good and honest and hardworking people, and yet we don't recognize just what these people are offering to our country and our own culpability in exploiting them. It's a tragic, heartbreaking story.
Erik Loomis is our guest, and Erik, I think we went on a different direction than the book is about, though, and I want to make sure we're fair to the book. The book you wrote is called A History of America in 10 Strikes, and you're talking in the book about how labor changed this country, and how striking, in other words, calling the hand of the employer to pay a decent wage, otherwise the employer's not going to have any work, how that made a difference. I think I can agree with you on that. So,
well, I think.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. But I think that, again, if we look at why the American labor movement has not been more successful, it's been these divisions over race. I mean, so I think that strikes have done a wonderful thing. Unions have done a wonderful thing. But a big reason, again, why they are not more successful today is because we divide ourselves over race. That's one of the major lessons of the book. That's something I focus on a great deal. If we want to rebuild our economy in this country, when we want to rebuild a nation that serves working class people, it has to serve all working class people. If we demonize other workers, we lose. We all lose, and corporations win.
Okay. When you say we divide ourselves over race, where? I don't see that at all. I live in Florida. I live in the South, and I don't see that at all. I work at a mall. The radio station is at a mall. So I see walking past this window, I see multiracial, interracial, whatever, couples all the time.
Well, it has changed to some extent, but look at the governor's race in Florida. You have two very, very, very different candidates, right? You have one candidate who is going to support workers. You have African-American male, very progressive, and you have another candidate who's strongly anti-immigrant. You have all kinds of voting rights issues going on. Who has access? Will felons be able to vote again? Felons in Florida, as like the rest of the country, tend to be people of color. So, I think that if people don't think that the nation's divided by race, people probably need to be talking to more Black and Latino people. I mean, if it's white people who say the nation's not divided by race, I think that often means they're only talking to other white people.
See, the unfortunate thing is that when you bring up the two primary candidates for the governor in the state of Florida. The unfortunate thing is that one of them is a black man and one of them is a white man. And Andrew Gillum is a great man. I disagree with his decision or his proposal to tax the corporations, not because he's a black man, but because I disagree with that concept. You could have Bernie Sanders saying the same thing, and I'd still disagree with it. And as far as Ron DeSantis, I'm not a big fan of him either. However, I don't see that his big message is anti-immigration. It is not anti-immigration. It is not at all. And in fact, if immigration comes up in any conversation with Mr. DeSantis, it's about illegal immigration. He didn't make the laws. He's just saying that the laws should be enforced so that we have some kind of a control on it like it's supposed to be. Other than that, change the law. My big thing about immigration is the laws just take too long. The procedure to become a citizen takes it's absolutely unacceptable to take 20 years. And I know that's the case.
Well, again, if you go back to Ron DeSantis, he's a huge supporter of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's attorney general is Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions, they're pushing new policies, yes, against undocumented workers, but also against workers who are legally here. They're threatening to strip rights away from legal immigrants who have to use Medicare, for instance, or Medicaid, who use public assistance. They're aiming to reduce the number of legal immigrants into this country. Ron DeSantis supports all of these. And, I think this whole conversation demonstrates, we talk about taxing corporations. Corporations should be taxed. Corporations
you can't.
Yeah, of course you can.
No, you
America
can't. No, you can't.
America is a nation that has some choices to make. Will this nation once again focus on equality? Will this nation once again create a working class that has the ability to succeed in this nation? We had an America in the 1950s that taxed top earners at 90%. This is something that is part of our history. It's something that my book attempts to recreate. And if we simply allow us to believe in pro-corporate mythology, we allow ourselves to be divided, allow ourselves to see corporations as our leaders instead of people who exist to exploit us, and we recreate the world of the 19th century, which was a terrible world. Today, because we do not tax corporations, because we do not tax the wealthy, we have the highest income inequality we have seen in this nation in a century. That is an absolute fact. And the more money that we give to corporations, the more that money takes away from what made this nation as good as it's ever been. And so, it's unfortunate that people don't see this. But that is the reality that we face. That is what this nation is like today.
Can I argue or debate a little bit about taxing corporations? Why I say you can't tax a corporation is because when you tax a corporation, the corporation says, okay, now money is going out. We got to get money back in. Otherwise, we're not going to exist, or we're not going to be rich, or our stockholders are going to complain. So there's always going to be a solution to the problem that is caused by that taxation. Now, when that taxation takes place, and this is historical. This is everywhere. What'll happen is one of three things. Either they will lower their workforce or their wages for that workforce. That's not good. Or they'll pass on the cost that they now have to pay so that the product they're selling costs more. So the tax really does go to the consumer. You really are taxing the person, not the corporation. And the third thing that happens is they move out of town. They go somewhere else. I have hundreds of examples of corporations who moved their headquarters. Burger King is one of them. So that if their headquarters is elsewhere, then guess what? The taxes don't apply to them.
Well, these are solvable problems. Now, look, if you want to say have a bill that reduced the corporate tax while significantly raising a tax on the wealthiest Americans, sure, I could support that, right? Transferring what those taxes look like, sure, there's room for debate over how you do this, right? But these processes, automation, capital mobility, companies, moving and setting up shop overseas, they go back long before this particular issue became part of the world. Basically, what's happened is that we have incentivized, and this goes back into the 60s, we have incentivized corporations to move overseas in any number of ways. This has contributed materially to the decline of the American working class. So a couple things have to happen here, right? First of all, these are solvable problems, right? Whether it's transferring a corporate tax to a tax on the wealthy, we can debate those kind of things. Those are policy proposals. But I think that the bigger picture here is that we have created a political and economic system that has incentivized profit going to a small number of people, CEOs and shareholders, and being taken away from workers. So whether we tax corporations or don't tax corporations, there's still many other incentives for corporations to move operations overseas and other ways of moving money around. And so what we need is creative solutions moving forward.
Right.
And I have proposed a number of these. Such as opening, for instance, creating international labor standards so that corporations lose the incentive to move overseas or move anywhere they want to just to bust the union.
Yeah, the problem with that is you're expecting other countries to fold to the mandate of America. They're resenting us already as it is. They're not going to do what we tell them to do.
They don't have to, but what has to happen?
Well,
if we open our legal system to workers overseas that are laboring for American companies and creating products for American companies, that changes the whole world. And I think that the issue of international law is too complicated for a short radio show. I could explain this, but I only have 2 minutes left here. and so the only thing I would say is that there are solutions to these problems. We have to think creatively about how to recreate an economy that works for everyday people. And this is a moment when unions are in rapid decline that conversation has to take place.
Maybe so, but we're all ears. If there's a solution to that problem, if there's a solution to fixing the divide between those who make the most and those who make the least, how is that ever going to happen? I probably make less than you. Do you want to give me some of your money? I doubt it. And why should the government tell you you have to? That's insane. That's not America.
That's actually a total falsehood. That is America. The idea that America equals the wealthy, that America equals capitalism, that's mythology. That's not reality. That is something that has been driven into us by. But that's something that's been driven
I thought that's what you were saying.
America is also civil rights. America is Social Security. America is Medicare.
Right.
America is freedom and justice for the world's people. These things are also America. I mean, so if we assume America equals unregulated capitalism, there's just no evidence for this.
I think we disagree, Erik. Thank you for being on the show. The book is called A History of America in 10 Strikes. I found it on Amazon. Do you have a website you want to recommend? Erik? He hung up on me.
Oh, he sure did. How rude. How rude.
So if he sells 1 million books, if he sells 1 million books, and he has a little corporation of his own based on the sales of his books, he wants the government to come and say to him, you know what, we're going to take your money and we're going to redistribute it to those who don't make as much as you, those who didn't take time to write a book, those who didn't take time to talk to radio hosts.
Exactly.
And you hang up on your host when I'm trying to, hey, if you're going to bring something to the radio show that's going to be debatable, guess what? You expect a debate. I never was rude to the guy.
Never, ever.
Please.
He's rude.
This is one of those interviews I didn't like.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Fox News.